Well, someone finally paid the piper in Miami, and it is Chris Grier. That is right. Chris Grier is out in Miami as the general manager. So, finally, Ross's patience wears thin and someone is put on the chopping block. Man, we got a ton to discuss. What's the plan for the trade deadline? Who are some options to replace Chris Grier? We got a lot to discuss. Do me the favor, smash the like button. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe. I know a lot of y'all have been waiting for this moment. Well, here we are. Chris Grier is out as general manager of the Miami Dolphins. Let's get into it.
Touchdown! Got it! You have got to be kidding me. Jalen Waddle has a Dolphin touchdown. And he will score! Field down the near side, man open, touchdown! The run from Tua Tagovailoa. Touchdown! He's going deep. He's got it for a touchdown again!
Beautiful day to be a Dolphin fan. Let's go! Many thought it would be Mike McDaniel that paid the ultimate price, but we were proven wrong. What's good, Fin Nation? What's good? It's your boy Reason, and we are back here for another one, and it is quite the one. As a move some have been calling for years, even before Mike McDaniel arrived. General Manager Chris Grier is out in Miami. The Miami Dolphins and Chris Grier have decided to part ways. Now, it's being spun as this, but the question has to be, was he really nudged out the door? Man, what a day, what a day. It is Halloween. Happy Halloween. The nightmare on Don Shula Drive is trying to be corrected. And it started today at just a little after 11 o'clock. This is exactly what happened. Chris Grier and the Miami Dolphins met this morning and mutually agreed to part ways. Grier has been with the Dolphins since 2000 and served as the general manager since 2016. A man who's been with the franchise for over 25 years, right? As long as the Miami Dolphins have not won a playoff game, Chris Grier has been in the building, and now that is no more. I mean, what do you say right here? Because here is where I'm at with this situation. All right? This is where I simply fall with all of this. At least Ross is showing some life. Now, what's interesting here is Mike McDaniel is untouched. Mike McDaniel is sticking around for now, at least. Chris Grier is the one who's obviously the first to fall on the sword because of this situation. We're going to get into a statement from Ross here in a second, but one has to automatically start asking themselves, does this mean Mike McDaniel is going to be passed off to whatever the new regime is? To me, that is one of the most interesting things in all of this. Now what with Mike McDaniel? Is he a dead man walking? You know, like now where do we go from here? Is it goodbye Chris Grier? But and the reason why I'm asking this is this. And shout out to Grow Together 937. He said, "Thank God that bum is finally gone." I knew a lot of people wanted him out of here. Sorry I wasn't live earlier. I was running some errands and I wasn't at home, but here I am with you guys. But this is why we have to ask all of this regarding Mike McDaniel, in my opinion, because is the meddling going to continue? Remember, when Mike McDaniel came here, he had certain conditions, restrictions, however you want to word it, okay? Whatever wording you want to use to describe the situation. Remember, he had to keep Josh Boyer. He had to keep Danny Crossman. Is this now going to continue on with the new general manager search? Is it going to be you have to keep Mike McDaniel? I want Mike McDaniel a part of this vision? And then this also now, and we're going to get into candidates in a bit here, but does this signal an internal hire? Does this mean it's going to be someone already familiar with Mike McDaniel? Is it going to be a Brandon Shore? Is it going to be a Champ Kelly? Right? Is this search, you know, it is odd that the general manager is going before the head coach. To me, that is what I'm just sitting here like, okay, that's kind of okay. So what's the deal with the rest of the team? Now, listen, you had to send a message. You had to do something. So I'm not going to sit here and say this is, you know, this is it. I'm not gonna sit here and say, well, this is it, blah, 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 blah. I'm happy. Because I think this is just the beginning of what needs to happen. But my whole point is, if you were going to clean house, why wouldn't you fire both? Why would you fire one and keep the other? I mean, because like I said, now you fall into the, is Mike McDaniel going to be part of a package deal? Of you, like, I mean, could we, do you really put it past Stephen Ross to say to a new general manager, yeah, you can have full reign, but you got to make Mike McDaniel and Tua Tagovailoa work? And if you are worried about, and I'm not saying he deserves a chance after what his defense looked like in the first, 7 weeks of the season, if you wanted a chance to see what Anthony Weaver had as one of the hottest coaching candidates on the market last cycle, you think you would get rid of Mike McDaniel so you could test that out and see what you have in that. Right? Because, listen, I agree. I agree with all of you that wanted Chris Grier gone. That move needed to happen. But does that really impact and change the product on the field? Like, are we still going to have to put up with Mike McDaniel's bad play calling? Mike McDaniel looking like a deer in headlights? Or we're still going to have to put up with that. And my whole thing was, if you wanted to see what he had, if you wanted to see what Frank Smith had, hell, if you wanted to see what Darrell Bevell had, you would feel the change would happen right now. Now, what's interesting here is Anthony Weaver subtly called out Chris Grier in the media just a few weeks ago. Remember, he said, I can only cook with the groceries I'm given. Basically indicting the man who buys all the groceries, and that would be Chris Grier. Now, this is a big step in the right direction in the sense of Chris Grier was a Garfinkel guy. Stephen Ross, clearly loved this guy. And another thing, too, is everyone who was fearing that the NFL's issue and ongoing case with Brian Flores was impacting Stephen Ross from putting this team first. Well, you can throw that theory basically out the window. That theory can go right out the window. So, and I think more changes need to come. So I think this should just be the beginning of it. But Stephen Ross, he did go ahead and he did deliver a statement only moments after the news broke. Stephen Ross released a statement. We know he's famous for statements. He released one as soon as Tyreek Hill quit, backing Chris Grier and Mike McDaniel. So this was his statement. This is what Stephen Ross said today. This morning, I made the decision along with General Manager Chris Grier to mutually part ways. I have incredible respect for Chris and his family, and I want to thank him for his many contributions to the Miami Dolphins over the past 26 years. As I assessed the state of the team and in my discussions with Chris, it became clear to both of us that change could not wait. We must improve in 2025, 2026, and beyond, and it needs to start now. Champ Kelly will serve as interim general manager effective immediately, and we'll begin our search process for a new general manager. I want to thank Champ for stepping up and his commitment to the Dolphins' success this season. There's a lot of football left to play, and we need to fight even harder. I have always been and remain committed to building a winning team that consistently competes for championships. I am incredibly proud of our leadership as an NFL organization and our continued commitment to the community, but our performance on the field and our team building process have not been good enough. There are no excuses. I want to thank the fans for their continued support and passion for this team. You deserve a championship caliber team you can be proud of. There's much work ahead to return the Dolphins to sustained success, and that work begins now. Finishing the season strong, evaluating all areas of our football operation, and moving forward with a clear vision for our future. So right there, you hear it. Champ Kelly is going to serve as the interim general manager. Now, Champ Kelly, why does this matter? Because, well, for one, he was brought in on a role. I mean, remember, when we hired Champ Kelly, right, we essentially, he had agreed to part ways with the Raiders in February. We signed him not even a month later as a senior personnel executive. Now, remember, Champ Kelly, he served as interim head coach in 2023 when the Raiders fired general manager Dave Ziegler. So Champ Kelly actually has experience in terms of being an interim general manager. So with the hiring, with the promoting of Champ Kelly to interim general manager, that's actually a good move. He actually, I think Marvin Allen would have been a fine one too. But that was a good move. Champ Kelly, we brought him over here, and this is already paying dividends. Now, I'll say this. Clearly, he's not being given full reign in terms of Champ Kelly turning around and saying, hey, listen, yeah, okay, my first order of business is we got to fire Mike McDaniel. Obviously, he's not being given that kind of grace, right? But he is being given some kind of power in the sense of, remember, we heard from Barry Jackson that the plan was going to be that the trade deadline would extend beyond the desk of Chris Grier, and it would involve Stephen Ross, Tom Garfinkel, and Ross's son-in-law, Dan Silman, right? That's what we were told the plan was for the trade deadline. Well, check this out. Here's the plan for the trade deadline now with Chris Grier no longer a part of the team. Right there, the Dolphins will go into Tuesday's trade deadline with interim GM Champ Kelly making key decisions. So Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Matthew Judon are top trade candidates, and Champ Kelly is basically now going to be running point on the trade deadline. So, now what's interesting here is if I remember correctly, because Champ Kelly was made interim GM during the 2023 season in November, Champ Kelly actually, from what I looked into, Champ Kelly did not make any real trades as a general manager. So this is kind of new territory for our interim GM. Right? But, I mean, he should be given the mandate by Ross, hey, do whatever you got to do. Do whatever you got to do. Make this happen. So, remember, the trade deadline is only 4 days away. So, remember, Grier was also refusing to take call on several players, right? He wasn't willing to take calls on Jalen Waddle, which I think that'll continue. But apparently, Chris Grier wasn't willing to take calls on a guy like Rasul Douglas. So, is this going to be a totally different approach? I mean, why are you unwilling to take calls on Rasul Douglas? Right? Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. And that is kind of where he's been at. So, and I'll show you exactly what we're talking about here, because Tom Pelissero even went ahead, and I believe he even tweeted it out, if I remember correctly. And maybe this could be another reason why they said, yo, what are you doing, Chris? You got to get out of here. If you're not willing to make something happen for this team, peace out. That could very well be the issue too. Right? So, now, I don't think the wording is wrong here, but check what Tom Pelissero tweeted out today after Chris Grier got fired. Right there in front of you. Players the Dolphins received trade calls on, but were unwilling to deal in recent weeks include Jalen Waddle, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Matthew Judon, and Rasul Douglas. With a 2-7 record and a new interim GM, teams are certain to check back in starting today. So there you go. Right there in front of you. Never mind Jalen Waddle. I mean, okay, we can understand you not taking calls on. But not willing to listen and unwilling to deal. Even if you want to keep, let's say you want to keep Jalen Phillips because you think you can bring him back on the cheap because of his ceiling and his youth. Okay, so let's take the 2 top names off. But unwilling to deal Bradley Chubb, Matthew Judon, and Rasul Douglas? For what? These guys aren't long-term solutions. What was the issue here? Like 3 of the 5 players on this list should be traded. Like, at minimum here. Like, what are we waiting on with Bradley Chubb? He's been terrible setting the edge this year. What, because he got a couple sacks stumbling into some quarterbacks who are holding on to him? Matthew Judon. Matthew Judon has done exactly nothing since he came here. What is the over-willingness to keep a Matthew Judon? Rasul Douglas. Rasul Douglas is not a long-term solution. Rasul Douglas is not going to be here for the next 3 or 4. He's probably not even going to be here next year. You could flip a veteran free agent signing into a pick. I don't care if it's a 5th rounder. What are you doing? I've said this. Even if Darren Waller would have been healthy, I would have traded Darren Waller. Because he created some value. Now, Jalen Waddle, to me, is the only one I wouldn't be down to listen to out of this list. But, I mean, what are we doing here? And you have to wonder if that was another one of the final straws. If that was another one of those, bro, if you're not willing to fix this situation and you're going to go down with the ship, okay, the ship's going down. You play the violin all you want as the Titanic sinks. It's going down. I thought that was just, when I read that, I was like, wow. Now it makes even more sense when you really actually think about it. Right? Like, when you really actually think about it, I was like, okay, yeah. Not only are you losing, but you got a general manager who's holding on, right? You got a general manager who just won't let go. Now, my other thing, too, is I wonder if this could turn from an interim thing. I go back to what I said about McDaniel. Could this turn to an interim thing to a full-time thing? Champ Kelly obviously wants the opportunity and wants the shot. Was it one of those things where Ross said, okay, I want you to trade all these players, plus I know you're okay with keeping Mike, right? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I don't know. He's young, too. Champ Kelly's only like 46. So, and he's interviewed for some jobs. He interviewed for the Jets GM job. That went to Joe Douglas in 2019. The Broncos job that went to George Patton. The Jacksonville job that went to James Gladstone. So he's interviewed for all these jobs. And remember, Mark Davis even considered him for that Raiders job, and then they hired Tom Telesco. So, and he's a, former player, right? He was at Kentucky. So, and I kind of like Grier, and I know you're not going to like to hear this, he started off as a scout and has worked his way up. So, and hey, he's a Florida boy. He grew up in Florida. Now, I do think what is going to impact Champ Kelly is the GM market is pretty fruitful. And we're going to talk about that in a minute here. In fact, I would say the GM market is better than the coaching market right now. The options for a head coach are far better than the options right now for a general manager. So, it's going to be interesting to see what Champ Kelly does because, you also got to think about this, right? If we're hearing a week ago that the trade deadline approach is going to extend beyond Chris Grier and it's going to be Stephen Ross, it's going to be Dan Silman, Ross's son-in-law, and it's going to be Tom Garfinkel, and then we now find out Chris Grier was unwilling to trade players that teams were calling on, like Phillips, Chubb, Judon, and Rasul Douglas. Was this move made not only due to the record, but was this due to the involvement of the trade deadline that Ross, Silman, and Garfinkel have? Was this done because Champ Kelly will do their deeds, will follow out and execute their desires for the trade deadline? Whereas Chris Grier was pushing back a little bit. So, I mean, you got to wonder to yourself, was this man put in and given the interim job and put in power because he wants the opportunity and he's willing to say yes a little bit more than he should? I think that's a reasonable question to ask regarding the whole situation. I think that's a very, very reasonable question to ask. But listen, I'm not going to lie. Hey, I'm here for it. I'm a fan of the move. I mean, you had to do something. You had to send a message, point blank, period. You had to send a message. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So, listen, I thought something like this should have been done after week 1. I obviously think the coach should have gone with him. But look at it this way. We are not going to further embarrass ourselves. And what do I mean by that? We aren't going to give Chris Grier the chance to have a 4th head coach. And that was one thing, because remember, there's a lot of rumbling that, Chris Grier could be out. Chris Grier could stay, but the head coach could be out. And obviously, it's wound up being the other way around. And again, the problem with me, and the reason why I'm asking if Champ Kelly's, saying yes a little bit more, that's my nice way of saying, is he a yes man? My issue with that is, again, what I mentioned about Mike McDaniel. Is he being made the interim general manager right now because he's going to play along with keeping Mike McDaniel and the move and trading players that Ross wants gone at the deadline? And then is that going to get us right back into the Chris Grier cycle where, because he basically does what the owner wants, you're going to make him the permanent general manager? So, because, I don't know. Because I've also, remember, I talked about this, and Hey Chickens brought it up here. He said, I think you're onto something, Reason. He gets rid of Grier so he can have a fire sale, but he keeps McDaniel and tells him to tank. Remember, I've asked you guys the question, has Stephen Ross approached Mike McDaniel and said, hey, are you willing to tank this season? And remember, it was off the basis of Mike McDaniel walking into into Stephen Ross's office and saying, listen, I want a shot at drafting another quarterback. I've done what I can with Tua. You asked me to come here and fix Tua. I made him the league leader in passing yards. He went to a Pro Bowl. First Dolphins quarterback in 30 years to go to a Pro Bowl. I want a chance to draft my guy. I messed around with and succeeded with your reclamation project, but that has a ceiling that we've already reached. And then what did I say? Ross turns around and says to him, okay, I'll give you a chance to draft your own guy, but you got to tank for me. That's been something that I have wondered. That has been something I have been wondering. You guys all know this. So, another thing that's come out too is Chris Grier wanted no move regarding Jalen Waddle, right? He believed because of one possession games, the Dolphins could turn it around. I don't think this means Chris Grier is I don't think this means that, now look out, here we go. Jalen Waddle's going to get traded. I don't think Jalen Waddle's going to get traded. But I do think Jalen Phillips and these pass rushers, I think your days might be numbered. I think veterans who, I don't know if you are going to, if you're not going to be long-term contributors here, I could see them getting, the axe for sure. I don't know. This is very, very interesting stuff, man. I mean, you guys all wanted it, and now we're sitting here, and now he is out. Chris Grier is out with the Miami Dolphins. They have parted ways. Guys, smash that like button. You guys have been waiting for this day for so long. Go ahead and smash that like button. You guys got what you wanted, right? You guys got what you wanted. And I'm not even sitting here and saying, like, hey, you guys boo-hoo, you guys, I'm not even saying that. I'm saying you guys got what you wanted, so go ahead and smash that like button. Y'all been waiting for this. All right? Get those likes up because you've been waiting for this. Now, what's interesting about this, to me, too, is if you follow me on X, let's get into some guys, long-term ideas who could replace Chris Grier. Now, I think the number one guy that I've told you guys to keep an eye on is Brandon Shore. Right? Brandon Shore is the one that I've been telling you guys to keep an eye on. All right. Ross loves him. Garfinkel loves him. Behind Ross and Garfinkel, I've heard for years he's the third most powerful man in that building, even more powerful than Chris Grier. So I think Brandon Shore is a candidate for sure. But I want to show you something because I tweeted this out this morning around like 9 a.m. And I'm wondering if Stephen Ross listened to my Dear John letter. But this would be my top candidate. All right? This would be my top candidate in this search. So let me show you guys this. I wrote this morning. I said, Dear Stephen Ross, do what you must to interim this team, quote, plays for the best draft pick possible the rest of the season. If that means mandating starters are benched for lesser talent and multiple players are moved at the deadline, so be it. That means you put out a statement that you will ride the rest of the season out with McDaniel and Grier and then relieve them of their duties to make them dead men walking and the situation even more toxic, so be it. Fire Chris Grier and everyone underneath him once the season is over, end of story. You can do that now, but why would you when they are getting you closer to the goal of the number one pick in the draft and we are already 9 games in? Hire Ray Agnew and let him rebuild the front office, the coaching staff, the team, and everything in between in his vision without any meddling. Ozzie Newsome 2.0 type scene. Sincerely, Dolphin fans who want to see a playoff win before they die. I wrote this out and posted this about 2 hours before Chris Grier was fired. Ray Agnew is my top candidate. I get total Ozzie Newsome type vibes. Former player. Remember, he played on the Rams. He was part of the greatest show on turf. He was on the defense of that team that won in 99 with the Rams. So he's a Super Bowl winner. Played defense like Ozzie Newsome. Right? Go look at what he has done in his background. Go look at what he did before he got to Detroit. All right? Like, he's been around and he's done some great stuff. Currently, he's the assistant general manager for the Detroit Lions. But remember, he was the director of pro personnel for the Los Angeles Rams before that. So he was a key part of the build in LA. You know, the build that basically put together a team that was damn near perfect and just needed Matt Stafford swapped out for Goff to win a Super Bowl. Right now, he is heavily involved in the roster construction and player evaluation with Brad Holmes in Detroit. Go look at that team. Look at how they're built. Look at that offensive line in Detroit. That's what we've been salivating for. Look at what they've been able to build that offensive line. They've given it a running game with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Look at what they've turned Goff into in Detroit when the Rams treated him as a castaway. And then look at, managed to add Laporta. They've added Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like, look at how good that the roster construction, and he's been one of the key pieces to that. That is who I would be bringing in. That is my top pick right there. Ray Agnew. Now, there are some other options, obviously, too. I think some other interesting options are Andy Weidel from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think he's a very, very interesting option. He is the assistant general manager for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He has decades upon decades of experience in terms of scouting. Before he was with the Steelers, he was with the Pittsburgh. Before he was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, he was with the Eagles. A guy that I've talked about for a few years on this channel, Ed Dodds. He's the assistant general manager in Indianapolis. Now, what's interesting to me is he has been a name that has been popping up for quite some time, but he hasn't ended up landing a job. Now, I know around the league and across the league, Ed Dodds is very, very respected for his evaluation, his evaluation and scouting ability. And I mean, go look at what's been built under, with Ed Dodds in the building over in Indianapolis. Because he's been there for quite some time. He's been there since 2017? And then in 2018, he was made the assistant general manager. Ed Dodds is also very involved. And I know Colts fans actually don't want to lose him. The Titans interviewed him this offseason, before they settled on Bergonzi from Kansas City. Dodds has been in the league for 22 years and 8 years of those with the Colts. So I think Ed Dodds is an interesting name too. That guy would be high up on my list, right behind Ray Agnew. Ray Agnew would be number 1, but Ed Dodds would be right there. I think another one too is George Kokonis from the Baltimore Ravens. He's the vice president of player personnel. And again, that's a guy who has an important scouting role for the Ravens. And I think what's interesting with that kind of move right there, here's the thing. This is why I come back to Ray Agnew. I want you to follow me and walk with me on Ray Agnew for a second here, okay? Think about this. Before Brad Holmes and Ray Agnew basically arrived in Detroit, people, think about this. The Detroit Lions were the NFC version of us. Remember? You've got Dolphin fans that cheer for the Lions, not just because of Dan Campbell in the playoffs, but because they were the NFC version of us. And look at the relevance they are at right now. Look at the relevance they have gone to right now. Look at the build right now. Yes, do they play indoors? 110%. But they are built like a team that plays outdoors in Detroit. That is what intrigues me so much about Ray Agnew. And I go back, you guys know, if I could have anyone in the world right now to come in and fix this franchise, you guys have known me. It would not be Bill Belichick. I would back the Brinks truck up for Ozzie Newsome. So I'm trying to figure out the next best solution, because you're not probably pulling him out of retirement and from his advisor role from the Baltimore Ravens. Look at the draft. Look at the defense that's been drafted. And remember, he's a defensive player. Aiden Hutchinson, Jack Campbell, right? The Detroit Lions have been a really good, and it's funny because everyone talks about reason they draft a lot of the guys you want, but they have drafted really, really well, right? Terrion Arnold, Brian Branch was a great draft pick. Look at what Alec Anzalone has turned into for them, right? They've drafted really, really well on both sides of the ball. They've found the formula over there of blending youth and good, sustained free agent signings. That's what's impressive about what's been built in Detroit. And like I said, they are built like a team that runs the ball in Detroit. And I go back to it. Detroit was in the same cycle as we were. Guys, look at what Matt Stafford was there with Calvin Johnson. They were roses blooming out of the concrete, and they couldn't do anything. Stafford goes to LA, wins a Super Bowl. Right? It was the Detroit Lions organization. The franchise was the problem. The franchise was rotten at the core, and they've turned it around. They turned it all around. And Ray Agnew was one of the key components to that. And that is what we need in Miami. Someone who's going to turn this around. Like, I want you to walk with me. Imagine Ray Agnew. And then imagine if you could pull it off. Like, imagine if the Ravens don't pull it together and you could pull off the move for Harbaugh from the Ravens. Imagine putting something like that together. But I think we'd also have faith. I mean, Agnew was part of the search that found, you know, I feel like this is, we're moving in the real right direction right here, man. Remember, Agnew, if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I do, he was part of the search, right? Ray Agnew, he was, part of, now I know he signed 7 days later, but I know he was part of that whole bringing in with Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, et cetera, et cetera. They were hired 7 days apart, I think, Campbell and Agnew. So, but even still, look at, he's worked with Dan Campbell. He's seen what the success of a good coach can have on a team. Now, someone's going to sit here and say, okay, what does this mean moving forward for Mike McDaniel? Is a guy like Ray Agnew going to want the personality of Mike McDaniel? Is he going to? I don't care. Let this man, let out whoever you hire, figure it out. And this is what kind of goes back to, we know Ross doesn't like change. We know that scares Stephen Ross. And that's what has me paused that this, this hire may come internal. The saddest thing would be with candidates like Ray Agnew, Ed Dodds, Mike Cockiness out of Baltimore, with all of these, potential great Andy Weidel, with all these great candidates out there, having these candidates out there and passing them over for someone internally just because they'll be a yes man. And here's another thing too. Can we also say this? Gentlemen, ladies, didn't take long for Brad Holmes, Ray Agnew in that front office to turn it around. It didn't take very long at all. Guys, over 360 of you in the room. Smash that like button. If you're new, go ahead and subscribe. Now, another interesting name actually tweeted out after the firing. Look at who tweeted out after the firing. Louis Riddick. Louis Riddick, who Dolphin fans have wanted for quite some time to be Chris Grier's replacement, go ahead and tweets out a set of eye emojis. Now, to me, I don't know where I stand with Louis Riddick as a GM. But again, former player, right? Obviously, you guys know, former safety. He's been director of pro personnel with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was a pro scout before that. Director of pro personnel with the Washington Redskins. But he hasn't been in an executive role in 12 years. Now, Louis Riddick has been interviewed recently for multiple GM jobs, right? 2020, he was interviewed for the Houston Texans and Detroit Lions. In 2022 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. In 2024 for the New York Jets. So Louis Riddick has been getting GM interviews. Would they go with someone like Louis Riddick? I don't know. But I'm going to tell you right now, I would prefer... I mean, we saw how the Mike Mayock thing worked out in Vegas. Now I'm sure Louis Riddick has a Rolodex and put together a team. But right now, like, the thing is, if you were to get a Ray Agnew, right, you're going to be plucking from probably the Lions front office a little bit and then outside sources. If you get a guy like Kokonis from the Ravens, you are plucking further from the Ravens front office like you did. If you are, with Weaver, if you are getting a guy like Andy Weidel, you are plucking from the front office in Pittsburgh, most likely. See, the reason why that matters is because this is another reason why I want a GM that comes from a franchise with some sustained success here. Like recently sustained success. I mean, the Lions are going on almost 5 years of sustained success now. And the reason why I want that is because you want to pluck other people who are from a winning environment. We got to bring as many winners here as possible in that front office. We just stuck with a guy in Chris Grier who was a loser for over 25 years. See, that's what kind of is like, okay, Champ Kelly, like, that's great. But Champ Kelly, I mean, what did the Raiders win? They went 5-4 with him and Antonio Pierce as interim GM and head coach. I mean, I'd be down for that. Louis Riddick as director of football operations and Ray Agnew as a GM. Let's go. I'm down for that. But is he going to come back to football for that role? Louis Riddick seems pretty dead set that he can be a general manager. Like another guy who I think doesn't get talked about enough, that would make sense. And again, the San Francisco 49ers, right? They've got 2 assistant general managers, right? And that matters because they've been watching John Lynch at work. Now, RJ Gillen has, he joined the 49ers in 2015. So he's been there for 10 years. He's been director of player personnel. He's been director of pro personnel. And then the other guy is Brian Hampton, right? He was hired by John Lynch in 2017. Brian Hampton was instrumental in scouting of players like George Kittle, Fred Warner, and Brock Purdy. Brian Hampton's another one. Like, I think you got some options from plucking from San Francisco. Especially, I like Brian Hampton. Again, teams that are having sustained success. Teams that are figuring the way out to win. That's what you want. Oh, man. Guys, smash that like button. You guys got what you wanted. Shout out to the sponsor of today's video. That, of course, is Sleeper. All right. You think you know football? Try to turn your football knowledge into real money with the Sleeper app, the ultimate fantasy sports app that turns game day into payday. Just download the Sleeper app and pick more or less on your favorite players. With more stats than any other daily fantasy app, just choose 2 or more of your favorite players from pregame or live. Pick from the predicted stats, and you can win up to 1,000 times your money if your picks win. Use promo code Phinside, and you get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions do apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational over 25 states. Go ahead and check out Sleeper today. So you guys got your wish. The Miami Dolphins, they made a move. They made a move. Someone finally paid the price. And it is Chris Grier. Now you have to also wonder in terms of what played into this decision. You know, they met this morning. They decided to part ways. A few things definitely probably played into this. Number one, Chris Grier was probably, not shown any leniency for the product he's fielded and put together, led to fans walking out with 11 minutes left on the game clock, as well as the other thing being fans getting put on national television with bags on their heads. The Boo Birds were out multiple times yesterday and for long stretches. And you got to ask yourself, man. You got to ask yourself, does Stephen Ross want a new quarterback? Was another factor in this that Chris Grier, him and Mike McDaniel vouched for guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Chris Grier to get paid, and it's backfired? That's another real question you got to ask yourself. Did that play a big factor in why we're sitting here today? We found out that Chris Grier was listening to but unwilling to trade guys like Matthew Judon and Rasul Douglas. I can only imagine how hard he was going for his draft picks, like Tua Tagovailoa, or one of his major trades like Tyreek Hill. Because remember, years ago, Stephen Ross wanted us to draft Lamar Jackson. Chris Grier basically talked him out of it, and look where we are right now. Lamar Jackson is lights out when he comes to Miami. And every time he goes off on the Dolphins, it's probably a painful reminder for Stephen Ross. He's probably sitting there like, how do I know more than this guy who's been, involved in scouting for 20 years? So, and then we're not even going to get into the embarrassments and the memes that I'm sure Ross has seen in regards to Chris Grier telling us we're more worried about the offensive line than he is, and then the offensive line crumbling, and all of us and our fears being, and our worries being justified and playing out. Ross has made a lot of missteps, man. A lot of missteps, and now he has paid the piper. And he is now in the unemployment line. So, man, like Scotty Joe says, better late than never. And now you got to wonder, if we flop on 9 days rest to the Buffalo Bills, and then we turn around and put up a dud in Spain, does Mike McDaniel go on the bye week? And does this, because remember, Champ Kelly served as an interim head coach with Antonio Pierce. Does this turn into the Frank Smith, Darrell Bevel, or Anthony Weaver show if the next 2 games go bad for Mike McDaniel? That's interesting to watch too. Guys, I need you right now. Do me the biggest favor. Smash the like button. Smash it, smash it, smash it as hard as you can right now. Over 400 of you in the chat. I'm 20 likes away from 200. Get me to 200 likes. Smash that like button. You guys got what you wanted. Chris Grier is out. And I'm going to get out of here too. And I'll see you on the next one. Enjoy your Halloween. Maybe the nightmare on Don Shula Drive is starting to end, and this is the first step in the right direction. Fins up. We'll see y'all in the next one.